Hello everyone, have a nice day. Last time, we watched Uri and Tu Tieu share a gentle date, simple food, warm smiles, and the kind of trust that makes life feel lighter. Today, we follow them into a new morning. They hand-make canned fish, bring them to the bustling market, and sell out with pure joy, not knowing a silent scheme is moving in the shadows. If you find this journey moving, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next episodes. You sold poison. The words rip through the market like a blade. Heads turn. Ladles pause mid-air. A paper fan stops fluttering. The man's finger is stabbing the air at Uri, at the neat line of jars that used to look like sunrise. Tu Tieu flinches. Sir, please. But the crowd's already gathering, faces tilting, curiosity curdling into doubt. Somewhere, a child drops a candy stick. It sticks to the dust. Uri steps forward, calm like a held breath. Bring me the jar your mother ate from, he says. Let me test it. The man laughs without humor. You think I carry it around? She's been unwell all morning. The word unwell floats over the table like a dark fly. It lands on the label, on the pride they glued by hand. For a heartbeat, everything freezes. And then time rewinds. Morning had been gold and easy. Light slid over the village roofs as if blessing them personally. Tu Tieu tied her hair and slipped into the white t-shirt Uri bought. Cotton soft against her skin, a tiny anchor of kindness. She hummed while lining up the jars on the bamboo table. The labels were crooked in the way only human hands can be. Uri glanced over and grinned like he had found a constellation. Looks like we're ready, he said. Do you think people will like it? She asked, not hiding her hope. If they like honesty, he answered, they will. They pushed the cart out. Wheels bumped over old stone. Roosters crowed. Someone argued cheerfully about the price of chili. A bike bell chimed like good luck. The air smelled of mint and steam, and the kind of morning that tells you today is bigger than it looks. The market was already breathing. Fish scales flashed silver. Steam coughed from breakfast pots. Uri unrolled a small cloth banner and smoothed it with his palm. Fresh homemade canned fish by Uri and Tu Tieu. It's a bit proud, she teased. Not proud, he said, eyes crinkling, just honest. They opened for business. First came glances, then questions, then a grandmother who smelled like pomelo leaves and patience. Local fish? She asked. Yes, ma'am, Uri said. Northern stream. Cleaned and canned by us. No preservatives, Tu Tieu added, soft but sure, only salt and care. The old lady bought too. The coins felt heavier than they were. Uri looked at Tu Tieu with that half smile people save for secret victories. She ducked her head, cheeks warm. Maybe they liked the smile that came with it, she murmured. Sales turned steady. Curious turned into convinced, and convinced turned into loyal in the way only a crowded market can do, with nods passed from hand to hand like news. A child tapped the glass. A student counted change twice. An uncle told a joke they'd all heard before and still laughed at. Neither of them saw the quiet theater happening 3 lanes away. Behind a wall of dried peppers, Mr. Tuan stood with his arms folded, hat brim cutting his face into shadow. Beside him, Lin smiled without warmth. So that's their miracle, Mr. Tuan muttered. Canned fish. Small people, Lin said, tilting her head. Small dreams. He didn't smile. You said you had an idea. Lynn watched Uri hand a jar to a woman who left grinning. "We let them sell everything," she said. "And then someone buys it all and brings it back poisoned with blame." Mr. Tuan's jaw worked. "You mean?" "I mean we buy through someone else. Later, when it goes wrong, the market will do the rest." Her voice stayed soft, the softness of silk hiding a blade. Perfect sale, perfect trap. The hired buyer wore a gray shirt and a polite face. He moved like smoke unnoticed until the room filled. He praised their labels, their price, their courage. He asked for a discount if he bought it in bulk. Uri, still learning the balance between hope and caution, offered a small one. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes, but who notices eyes when your dream is finally saying yes? By noon, they were sold out. "All of them?" Uri asked, not believing his own voice. "Every single one," Tu Tieu laughed, the sound bright and round as a bell. Uri hugged her quickly, clumsily, and honestly. Someone whistled. A few clapped. Tu Tieu blushed into his shoulder. "People are looking," she whispered. "Let them," he said. "They're looking at happiness." They didn't hear the truck door slam shut down the lane, didn't see the gray shirt vanish with the last of their jars. They only heard the small hum of a future clicking into place. In another part of the village, under the dim bulb of an old warehouse, Lynn twisted open a lid and tipped in a clear, sharp-smelling liquid. "Nothing dangerous," she said softly. "Just enough to make doubt grow." "You're playing with fire," Mr. Tuan said, not moving from the shadows. "Fire," Lynn murmured, "is how people notice the dark." The lid clicked closed. On the shelf, the rows looked identical. They were not. Evening slid over the village with the smell of lemongrass and brine. Back at their place, Tu Tieu washed jars for the next batch. Uri rewound a crooked roll of labels and hummed a tune that kept forgetting itself. They spoke the language lovers use when the day has been kind. What if we try peppercorn next time? What if we handwrite the date? What if we make 10 more than we planned, just in case? Sleep came easy. Hope made it softer. The next morning, the market woke with its usual music. But the bass line had shifted, almost inaudible at first. Two vendors glanced over, then away. A woman with a basket slowed, reconsidered, moved on. A boy whispered to his friend and looked guilty about it. "Strange," Uri said, quieter than usual. "I'll open a jar," Tu Tieu offered. "Let people taste." She popped the lid. Metal side. She lifted a spoon, tasted it, and her face broke like thin ice. "What?" Uri asked, already reaching. "It's wrong," she whispered. "Bitter." Uri sniffed, then tasted. Metallic. Off. Like truth with a film on it. He set the spoon down, as if it could bruise. "Not ours," he said, voice flat. "Someone tampered with it." He scanned the lids with a new, colder set of eyes. The ring seam. The faintest scratch where no scratch should be. A tiny pinprick on the crown. Too neat to be an accident. He felt the shift inside his chest. Trust moving over to make room for anger. Across the lane, Lynn stood half hidden behind a pillar, expression gentle as an empty bowl. Mr. Tuan lingered beside her like a question mark. "You've made your point," he murmured. "Not yet," she answered, without looking away. "They still think truth alone will save them." And then the man arrived, the one whose mother was unwell, and the market gave his voice a stage. "You sold poison." The ring tightened. Words threw sparks. Doubt found its legs. Uri raised his hand slightly, palms steady. "We'll fix this," he said. "Please bring the jar. We'll test it. You'll what?" Someone snapped. "Say sorry after you make people sick?" A vendor from 2 stalls down, who had smiled at them yesterday and was staring past them today, muttered, "I thought they were careful." "Maybe they cut corners," another voice said. The words hurt more because nobody shouted them. They were quiet enough to be believed. Tu Tieu's fingers trembled. She kept shaking her head as if that could erase the sound, the eyes, the shame that didn't belong to them and still stuck. "We cleaned everything," she said, voice breaking. "We boiled, we sealed, Uri moved to stand in front of her, a small shield. "We'll refund anyone who asks," he said, tone even, "and we will test every jar." A silence settled, the kind that doesn't forgive mistakes. By noon, the table was as empty as the day before, but the emptiness was heavy, not light. They packed in a hush that wasn't peaceful. Back home, the sun had lost its warmth. Shadows seemed to arrive first and carry the light in after them like a burden. "Did we do something wrong?" Tu Tieu asked, voice scraped thin. "We trusted too easily," Uri said. He wasn't blaming her. He was blaming the tenderness in both of them that believed the world would match it. She nodded, eyes shining. What now? Uri looked at the last unopened can from their first batch, the one they'd kept without knowing why. He set it on the table gently, as if it could hear. "Now, we prove the truth," he said, "and we find whoever turned it into a lie." He leaned close to the lid. There was a tiny puncture, almost invisible. Not on this last can, but he could see the difference compared to the tampered one. The seam here was clean. Every other suspect jar had a kiss of damage at the crown. So neat, so deliberate. "Whoever did this had tools," he said, "and a place to work unseen." "The warehouse by the old bamboo kiln," Tu Tieu said before she could stop herself. She knew the village the way river water knows river stones. "There's a light in there some nights." Uri met her eyes, the air between them filled with a wordless agreement. "We're not waiting for the market to decide who we are," he said. A wind pressed against the shutters. Somewhere far off, thunder grumbled like a warning someone chose to ignore. Uri grabbed his small field kit, the one he used for water tests by the stream. Not much, but something. He slipped the clean, lidded can into a cloth bag. Tu Tieu tucked her hair behind her ear with steadying hands and lifted the latch. They stepped into the evening early. The village lane that had carried them to applause now carried them past closed doors and quiet windows. The banyan's roots clawed the soil like old secrets. Ahead, the outline of the warehouse hunched against the sky. One high window glowing the faintest yellow. Uri squeezed her fingers once. She squeezed back. They moved toward the light. The warehouse breathed like a sleeping animal, slow, damp, secretive. A single bulb hummed near the ceiling, turning dust into a slow snowfall. Uri eased the door just enough to slip through. It sighed on its hinges as if warning someone. Tu Tieu's hand found his sleeve. "Careful." Inside, crates, a rusted table, a coil of tubing, a dented funnel, a ring of puncture tools glinting like thin fangs. On a shelf, their jars stood at attention to familiar labels under unfamiliar light. Uri felt the old calm arrive. the one he saved for thin ice and deep water. He set down the cloth bag, pulled out the last untouched can, and opened his small field kit. Strips, drops, a portable meter. Not a lab, but it would speak truth loudly enough. He tested a sample from one of the warehouse jars, first metallic signature, spiking to a bitter reading. Then he tested their clean can. The numbers steadied to normal, like a heartbeat in a quiet room. "See?" he whispered, showing her the meter. "Additive, not spoilage. Deliberate." The door clicked behind them. Uri straightened. The bulb hummed harder, a shape detached from the dark. The gray shirt buyer, expression turned mean with recognition. "Should have locked that," he said. "And yet," Uri answered, "here we are." Footsteps. Mr. Tuan appeared from the side aisle, cane tapping, eyes wary. Behind him, Lynn stepped into the light, elegant as a lie that takes its time. She looked at the jars, the tools, the meter. "You came faster than I expected." "We came when the truth asked us to," Uri said. Lynn's gaze drifted to Tu Tieu's face, then back to Uri's steady hands. "Truth," she repeated, tasting the word like a fruit she did not intend to swallow. "Do you know how little the market pays for truth? They buy drama, rumor, the heat that keeps the day noisy." Mr. Tuan's voice scraped the air. "We're done talking. They wanted to sell. We wanted them to stop. Balance. That's what you call it?" Tu Tieu's words were quiet and clean. Her eyes were wet but sharp. "You took a good thing and painted rot on it." Lynn's expression softened in a way that made no room for kindness. "You two made the mistakes small people make. You believed a perfect sale meant the world was on your side." She nodded at the gray shirt. He moved toward the table, as if to pack the tools away and fold the night back into itself. Uri stepped in front of him. "Don't," he said. Not loud, not pleading. Final. The man's jaw flexed. He reached again. Uri slid the meter across the table. Its screen flickered the ugly reading like a headline. "Touch anything, and this number becomes a story we will carry to the whole village." "Who will believe you?" Mr. Tuan asked, cane clicking once. "You sold poison. Word's already out." "Not poison," Uri said. "Sour doubt. A small dose is enough to make tongues work and eyes narrow." He looked at Lynn. "You counted on people being afraid." "I counted on people being people," Lynn said. "They prefer not to think too hard before they judge. It saves time." Silence pooled. Then Tu Tieu did something the night did not expect. She picked up one of the warehouse jars of the tainted kind and held it under the bulb, as if it were a fragile truth asking to be seen. The light made the liquid inside gleam with a faint, unnatural shimmer. "This is your work," she said to Lynn, "but my name is on it." "Names wash off," Lynn replied. "Reputations don't." The sentence landed like a wet cloth on a candle. Something in Uri's chest flared brighter. He took a breath, then spoke in the even cadence of someone building a bridge as he walked it. "Tonight, the warehouse keeps our secret. Tomorrow morning, the market keeps yours or breaks it. We'll bring this clean can." He tapped the cloth bag, "and this meter and one jar from your shelf." He nodded at the tools. "And if those go missing before dawn, we'll still bring these witnesses. Dents on the crowns, the puncture pin's diameter, the residual scent under the lid. We'll show people how easy it is to harm what's honest and call it failure." The gray shirt scoffed. "They won't care." They'll care that someone tried to make their grandmother sick for sport, Tu Tieu said. The steadiness in her voice surprised even her. And they'll care who thought that was clever. For the first time, Lin's gaze cooled another degree. You think righteousness is a currency, she said. It spends poorly. Some currencies only work in daylight, Uri answered. He reached for the clean can. The gray shirt moved too fast, knocking the meter. It skittered to the floor, cracking the silence into sharp edges. Mr. Tuan lifted his cane, and for a half-second, it looked like a command. Uri braced, but the cane struck the table instead, hard enough to make a tool jump and bounce. It clattered, rolled, and fell at Tu Tieu's feet, stopping against her shoe like a small admission. Mr. Tuan's voice came out hoarse. Enough. He didn't look at Lin. They'll go. We're finished. Lin's eyes narrowed, slow and dangerous, but she said nothing. Uri lifted the cloth bag. Tu Tieu gathered the meter, screen bruised but alive. At the door, she turned. Keep one jar, she told Lin softly. You like memories. They stepped back into the lane. Night smelled of wet stone and old smoke. The banyan shadow watched them pass. Dawn arrived without asking permission. The market shook itself awake. Vendors lifted tarps. Kettles hissed. A rumor can cross a village overnight, but truth needs a stage and a microphone. Uri and Tu Tieu brought both. They set up with no banner, no sales, just 3 jars and the little meter with its chipped corner. The grandmother, who'd bought the first 2 jars, came early, a cloth bag on her arm and a thoughtful line between her brows. Child, she told Tu Tieu, tell me what happened. Stay, Uri said to the growing ring of people. Watch. He opened the clean can from their first batch. He dipped the strip, waited, and showed the meter's calm number. He invited 3 bystanders, men who liked proof more than stories, to check their noses, their tongues. They nodded, faces untroubled by bitterness. Then he opened the warehouse jar they'd carried out under Lin's quiet glare. He dipped, waited, lifted the screen for everyone to see. The spike, ugly and undeniable. He held up the lid, pointing to a neat kiss of puncture, the kind a needle leaves when it means to be forgettable. Someone added doubt. He said simply, not spoilage, not carelessness, a hand. Murmurs moved through the circle like wind through dry leaves. The noodle seller from the next stall leaned in and squinted at the seam. That's tampered, he admitted. Too neat. A man cleared his throat, the one whose mother had been unwell. She's better now, he said, not quite meeting anyone's eyes. It passed. Bring me her jar, Uri said gently. We'll test it too. If it was ours, we'll pay for your week's meals. If it wasn't, we'll walk with you to the one who made it so. The man nodded once. The nod meant more than it looked. Across the way, Lin stood beside a stack of rice baskets, not hiding, but not inviting gaze either. Mr. Tuan's hat shade cut his face again, but his cane was quiet. Who would do that? Someone asked, loud enough to aim the question without naming a target. Anyone who's never held something fragile long enough to love it, the grandmother said, eyes on the jars. Her voice carried, soft and absolute. The circle loosened. A hand touched Tu Tieu's elbow, an auntie who bought greens there most mornings. We know how you work, child, she said. We see things. Another vendor yesterday's mutterer lifted his chin toward Uri. Bring more tomorrow. I'll stock 10 in the back. The dignity of that small sentence nearly buckled Uri's knees. He bowed. Thank you. As the crowd thinned, Lynn walked forward at last, cutting clean lines through the morning steam. Congratulations, she said, the tone so polite it was bruised. You've turned the market into a courtroom. We didn't, Tu Tieu replied. You did. We only opened the window. Lynn's smile touched nothing warm. Windows let in wind, she said. Be careful what it blows out. She turned to go, but Mr. Tuan didn't follow immediately. He looked at the jars the way a man looks at a road he chose, and now regrets the stones. It was a mistake, he said, not an apology, but not a denial either. He tapped his cane once and left. Uri exhaled a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Tu Tieu's hand slid into his under the table, small and certain. What now? She asked. Now we rebuild the slow way, he said. The way that sticks. They did not sell that morning. They gave samples, answered questions, let people touch the lids and see the difference with their own fingers. Sunlight caught the printed date and made it shine like a promise you could actually keep. By noon, 3 vendors had asked to stock a few. The grandmother brought back an empty jar, cleaned, dried, ribbon-tied. For your next label, she said, make it straight or crooked, just make it yours. Uri laughed, a sound that had edges but no bitterness. We'll try. As they packed up, a quiet weight lifted between them. Not all of it. Some weights become part of your spine, but enough that the world tilted toward possible again. They walked home through a lane that remembered them kindly. At the corner, a boy eating sticky rice called, "Hey, the honest fish people." He grinned, cheeks shiny with sugar. My aunt says she'll buy it tonight. Tell her to bring her own jar, Uri said. We'll fill it fresh. The boy saluted with a spoon. Aye. At their door, Tu Tieu paused. In her palm lay the last label from the first roll, the one Uri had fixed by lamplight. It was still a little crooked. She smoothed it with her thumb and pressed it onto the clean can they'd tested, aligning it by feel, not ruler. Perfect, she said. Honest, he corrected, and then he kissed her light. Careful. No audience, no applause. Just 2 people who had learned what it cost to stand together when the wind wanted to take. Far across the village, in the dim warehouse, a single forgotten jar remained on the shelf, untouched in the hush. Lynn stood before it, tracing the rim the way she had the night before. For a moment, her reflection in the glass looked almost like anyone else's. Then she turned away, and the jar kept the room's small memory, the shape of a plan, the echo of a scheme, the silence it preferred.
Trong giờ bơ vạch sale, Uri và Tử Tiêu đã biến đổi một buổi sáng đầy hy vọng thành một chiến thắng nhỏ. Họ tự tay làm cá hộp bày biện tại khu chợ nhộn nhịp, và sau những buổi bán hàng chân thành, thân thiện, họ đã bán hết. Linh và anh Tuấn bí mật thuê người mua hộ để lấy từng lọ, sau đó tẩm ướp cá vừa đủ để có vị không ổn. Đến sáng, những lời xì xào lan truyền, những lời phàn nàn, những cái nhìn liếc xéo và một kẻ buộc tội giận dữ. Bị sốc, Tử Tiêu nếm thử một nọ và phát hiện ra một mùi vị đắng. Kim loại nấu với dấu hiệu giả mạo rõ ràng. Uri che chở cho cô khi hơi ấm của khu chợ trở nên lạnh lẽo. Hứa sẽ sửa chữa mọi chuyện. Linh quan sát trong là sự hài lòng lặng lẽ, mong đợi niềm tin sụp đổ. Đêm đó, một ngọn điện dầu và một ngọn đèn chưa được chạm đến có thể vẫn là bằng chứng cuối cùng cho công việc của họ. Nắm tay nhau qua bàn, Uri và Tử Tiêu quyết tâm thay vì sợ hãi và thề sẽ khám phá ra sự thật, khôi phục danh tiếng và bảo vệ tình yêu của họ.